Edgar Allan Poe is dead. He died in Baltimore the day before yesterday. This announcement will startle many, but few will be grieved by it. The poet was well known, personally or by reputation, and all in this country. He had readers in England and several states of continental Europe, but he had few or no friends, and the regrets for his death will be suggested principally by the consideration that in him literary art has lost one of its most brilliant but erratic stars. That was an excerpt from Poe's obituary written by Rufus Griswold, who despised the famous Gothic writer. And he didn't stop there. Not too long after, he published a compilation of Poe's work titled The Works of the Late Edgar Allan Poe, which had a biography at the beginning where Griswold portrays the man as a drunken maniac loser who's a burden to be around. He kept all the money he made from it and never shared any profit to any of Poe's remaining family members. Why did Griswold have such a grudge against Poe? It was because of a negative book review that Poe wrote on a compilation of poems that Griswold published titled Poets and Poetry of America. In that book, only 3 of Poe's poems were featured in the very back of the publication, while Griswold's close friends contribute 50 poems. At the time, it was common for critics to write good reviews of their friends' books after exchanging to be in it as well. But here's the thing. Poe wasn't Griswold's friend. He was tricked into lending his poems, and he wasn't happy with that. So, he didn't write a good review, which led Griswold to try to ruin Poe's reputation by portraying him in such a negative light. However, Griswold unintentionally and ironically helped Poe to become one of the most iconic literary American writers of all time. After all the slanders, the public took an interest in Poe. His stories became more popular and sold better. Even though you may not have read any of Poe's stories or poems, you have heard of him. His name is mentioned in songs like I Am the Walrus by the Beatles. And Saint Jimmy by Green Day.
Cigarettes and running and a little bag of soap. I am the son of a bitch and Edgar Allan Poe. Raised in the city in the hail of lies. But a death warfare that we've been victimized. From the patron side of the denial. With an angel face and it takes for suicidal.
He has been parodied a couple of times in animated television shows like South Park and The Simpsons. His work has been adapted into feature films dozens of times. Probably the most famous ones are made by Roger Corman. One of them starred a young Jack Nicholson. Join me as we take a look at the life of the author and have a better understanding of how he came to be. Poe was born in Boston, Massachusetts on January 19, 1809. He was the second child of 3 of Elizabeth Arnold Poe and David Poe Jr., who were stage actors. Before he was 3 years old, tragedy struck which will change the course of his life forever. When he was only 2 years old, his father abandoned the family in 1810 and his mother came down with tuberculosis. He painfully watched her lying on bed coughing blood. She died and it was the beginning of his many tragic relationships with women. Poe was separated from his siblings when he was taken in by the childless Allan couple. He was never fully adopted. However, he formed a strong mother and son relationship with Frances Allan while having a not-so-good relationship with John Allan. In 1815, Poe traveled with the Allans to England and Scotland, where John planned to expand his tobacco business. Poe attended boarding schools throughout the 5 years, The family lived overseas. After John Allan's business venture failed, he moved the family back to Richmond, Virginia in 1820. When Poe was 15 years old, he met a girl named Jane Stannard. She was Poe's first love, but she died young of brain cancer, and for years Poe often visited Jane's grave and cried over her tombstone. Poe's relationship with John got worse because he cheated on his wife multiple times, and Poe believed that women should be treated with respect. In 1826, Poe was admitted to the University of Virginia in Charlottesville, but was forced to quit his studies after less than a year because of gambling and inadequate financial support from John. He came back home just to get his heart broken again when he found his then sweetheart, Sarah Elmira Royster, engaged. Right after, in 1827, Poe enlisted in the army under the name of Edgar A. Perry and published his first book of poems called Tamerlane and Other Poems. The book didn't do well and went by unnoticed. However, due to not many copies being sold, this publication became one of the rarest books of today. It's worth almost $700,000. In 1829, another tragedy struck. Miss Allan came down with tuberculosis and died. Poe and John reached a temporary truce after her death. John purchased Poe's release from the army and helped him get appointed to the U.S. Military Academy at West Point. In April 1829, at the age of 20, Poe went back to Richmond and moved in with his Aunt Maria Clem and 12-year-old cousin Virginia, who would marry the writer before her 13th birthday. There's not much information about exactly what their relationship was like, but they seemed like they were a devoted couple. However, Virginia became Poe's biggest tragedy since she also came down with tuberculosis and died in 1847. She was only 24 years old. The couple and Aunt Clem were living in Baltimore at that time. All these years of tragedies affected Poe's state of mind, which is reflected in his writing. The most famous and prime example of his work is The Raven, which became an overnight sensation when it was published. The story is about a narrator coping with the death of a loved one named Lenore, and once upon a midnight dreary, he is visited by a raven. Poe wrote this poem during Virginia's illness and was struggling to make enough money to feed her, keep her warm, and provide her medication. Poe was anticipating what was about to come when she died, leaving him behind. He was going through emotional stress and was feeling helpless, as happened before when he witnessed his mother and stepmother dying in front of him of the same disease. Like the narrator in The Raven, questioning himself if he'd ever be reunited with his beloved Lenore, Poe was probably asking himself the same about seeing Virginia again. After the passing of his wife, Poe wrote a new poem called Annabel Lee, which is about two young lovers who lived in a kingdom by the sea. The angels got jealous of their love and decided to end it by killing Annabel Lee. Poe was a feminist, portraying women to be intelligent, independent, and mentally strong, but they all die young due to unfortunate circumstances. Leaving behind loved ones to grieve, remembering the joyful days, and contemplating if they'll ever be reunited after death. Much like his characters, Poe in real life was dealing with the tragic losses of one after another. Poe's relationship with women had tragic endings, but his career luck wasn't much better. Even though Poe was a prodigy of his time and had written several short stories in multiple genres that would influence future writers, he struggled in poverty, which brings us... Mystery novelist Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who wrote the famous Sherlock Holmes series, was inspired by the murders in the Rue Morgue, which is considered to be the first modern detective story, which is about an unnamed narrator investigating the brutal murders of two women. Also, at the time, Poe wrote the unparalleled adventures of One Hans Fall and the facts in the case of M. Valdemar, stories about space travel and dystopia futures that have tales of humanity's relationship with the universe, which would inspire science fiction authors like Jules Verne, Arthur C. Clarke, Isaac Asimov, and the famous H.G. Wells. Of course, let's not forget that Poe is mostly well known as a horror writer. Stories like The House of Usher, The Mask of the Red Death, The Pit and the Pendulum, and The Telltale Heart not only influenced Stephen King, Clive Barker, and H.P. Lovecraft, but the genre itself. Poe's tales of horror are descriptive along with haunting visuals, exploring the themes of psychological terror and the unknown. Every single horror novel to this very day stems from Poe's writing. He is truly the grandfather of this genre, along with Mary Shelley and Bram Stoker. Without him, the world of horror wouldn't be the same today. It's quite a shame that Poe died when he was only 40 years old. The remaining years of his life after his wife died was tragic. He has lost his editor job, showed up drunk at his own live readings, and died under mysterious circumstances. After his wife died, Poe went on a spree of relationships with a few women in Philadelphia, Rhode Island, and back in Richmond. On September 28, 1849, Poe arrived in Baltimore on a tour to raise money to publish a magazine he was working on. His whereabouts for the next 5 days are unknown. Poe was supposed to go to New York, but instead he was found lying on the street by a bar on October 3rd. He was sent to Washington University Hospital of Baltimore, where he died on October 7th. What makes his death so odd is that he was found wearing someone else's cheap clothes that were too tight for him. Throughout the centuries, there have been theories about what could have happened to him. Some say that he drank himself to death, which isn't far-fetched since Poe did have a drinking problem, and he was found close by a bar. However, Poe during that time joined a temperance society, which was a movement promoting the complete absence of liquor. The physician at the hospital where Poe was being treated, John Moran, was convinced that the writer was neither drunk nor had been drinking. As I mentioned before, he was working on a magazine, and his friends and co-workers said he was doing better, so it doesn't make sense he wanted to go back to his old bad habits and drink himself to death. Some say that he was a victim of a political kidnapping. It was election day in Baltimore, and at that time, corrupt politicians would hire thugs to go out on the streets to kidnap people, change their clothes, and have them vote several times. That might be a possibility, but till this very day, no one knows for sure what was the cause of Edgar Allan Poe's death. It's kind of ironic that the author who wrote some of the greatest mystery stories of all time would have a mysterious death. There's no doubt that Poe's life was tragic, but his poems and short stories were revolutionary. It's quite a shame that he didn't live long enough to see how his work would impact the literature world. However, his work might have been forgotten if it weren't for Griswold. Without all the failed attempts to ruin Poe's reputation, literature wouldn't be the same today. So thank you, Griswold, for making Poe such a success. You'll forever be known for that and nothing more.